everybody. Okay, my mic is working. Okay, so I decided to, today, in my Janet Jackson shirt that I got when I saw her in concert about a month ago, not bragging, go ahead and do another entry into the Unhinged newspaper stories of the past. Again, I am reading these kind of just verbatim, but there are going to be a couple that I'm kind of giving a little more context to for the one that we're doing today. So for today's episode of Unhinged Newspaper Stories, I'm doing the Huntsville Gazette. So the Huntsville Gazette was actually a black paper, an African-American newspaper that ran from 1879 to 1894. The editor was Charles Henley Jr., and it was like a Republican-based paper. So I'm going to be reading the Huntsville Gazette issue dated September 3rd of 1881. So from there we'll be seeing, just a couple things going around the country and I guess what was just going on that week. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get into our very first story for the Huntsville Gazette that week. So this story is about President James Garfield, and just to give a little bit of context, James Garfield was basically shot by Charles Guiteau in July of 1881, and for about 11 weeks, so like 2.5 months essentially, the whole country was monitoring his condition. He would eventually succumb to his injuries sustained in the assassination on September 19th of 1881. However, this paper is dated, this issue is September 3rd of 1881, so he had not died yet, and there is a lot of hope. But basically in all newspapers around this time, we are seeing that focus on, James Garfield, if he's progressing or things like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and read this very first story. So President Garfield's condition on the 27th, Saturday, was so extremely critical that even the sanguine Dr. Bliss, for the first time, was forced to admit the improbability of his recovery. The noon bulletin of that day was the most discouraging yet issued, and non-official dispatches all agreed that a fatal termination was anticipated, and that probably within 24 hours. Greatly to the surprise and delight of all, however, towards the evening, the president rallied somewhat, and the improvement, although slight at first, continued without any serious interruption. This improvement was manifested in 4 important symptoms. The pulse became lower and stronger. The stomach resumed its normal functions. The inflamed glands suppurated freely, while the wound again presented a healthy appearance. In short, the president had successfully passed another and the most serious crisis yet encountered. So this story, and I did kind of provide context that President Garfield would eventually succumb to his injuries from this shooting on the 19th of September. Again, this kind of falls into the 27th, so this would be the 27th of August, the previous Saturday, where they're saying that there has been an improvement in the condition of the president. And I definitely don't want to, obviously they couldn't tell the future that he was going to pass away soon, but you can definitely see that very hopeful tone that Charles is writing in regards to President Garfield. And I did want to also provide some context here. President Andrew Garfield was a Republican president who, in terms of his view on civil rights, was actually pretty progressive of the time. 1881 is about 4 years after the end of the Reconstruction era, which is where there was sort of a lot of progress made by freedmen, like formerly enslaved African Americans. And it was very hopeful to have this Republican government who was going to be looking out for their best interests, especially in the post-Reconstruction era South, where you do have the rise of a lot of, white supremacist jurisdictions and, other things that are happening to basically keep them into like permanent second-class citizenship. So when you think of, President James Garfield and the way that Charles is like, and maybe I'm looking a little bit into it here, but the way that they are monitoring his condition, James Garfield being very popular amongst African Americans, it does make a lot of sense why it would have been very important for James Garfield to have, survived this assassination on his life for people like Charles in that era. James Garfield is somebody who believed in like universal education, government-sponsored education for African Americans and, you know, all Americans in general. And I was also able in my research to see that James Garfield was also somebody who promoted African Americans into fairly prominent positions. Actually, in his cabinet, you have the appointment of Frederick Douglass as the Recorder of Deeds, Robert Elliott as a special agent to the Treasury, and Blanche Bruce as a register to the Treasury. So he is looked at by a lot of African Americans, definitely like politically minded African Americans, as somebody who is you know, looking out for the betterment of their status in society. And it's kind of sad overall, but at the same time, you kind of do see, you know, the country was just watching him and seeing if he would recover, and why that would have been such an important thing to, you know, note, definitely for the Huntsville Gazette, which was an African-American newspaper operating at that time in the post-Reconstruction South. So definitely wanted to provide that context there, but that was the very first story for this episode. Into our second story. This one is kind of like, I guess, for some of my true crime people, because I think it definitely piqued my interest in that way. So I'll start. The investigation into the death of Jennie Cramer, whose dead body was found recently on the beach near New Haven, Connecticut, strongly implicates the Malley boys. All of the Malley family have testified that James Malley was at home on the night of the supposed murder. Other witnesses swear positively to having seen him on that night in company with the unfortunate girl. So I decided to look more into the Jennie Cramer story, and it is out of New Haven, Connecticut. So Jennie's body, Jennie, who was actually the daughter of German immigrants, her body was discovered on August 6th of 1881, which is about a month before the newspaper runs this story. And she was seen a lot in the company of James Malley, who is known locally to have had a very strong infatuation, that's the word, with Jennie. So during the trial, he is somebody, I guess even before the trial begins, he's somebody that a lot of people have their focus on. However, James is from a pretty prominent family, like the Malley family in New Haven. And looking into the actual trial, which occurred in 1882, the year, you know, the year after she was found, Jennie's character is at times called into question because she was known to be out into the wee hours of the night or unaccompanied at times, and I'm sure she probably flashed her ankles a couple times. It's 1881 and she's a woman, so, you know, they were going to call her character into question. Why was she out anyway? It's also known that one of the women who she was actually friends with, Blanche Douglass, she's actually exposed as a sex worker from New York and arrested during the trial. It's kind of like a shit show, honestly, because during the trial, newspapers actually initially report that Blanche is the wife of Walter Malley, who is one of James' brothers. But then it's discovered that she isn't. They also have to reprint these pamphlets that actually contain the, they basically contain the testimonies of several of the witnesses, because of the fact that the Malley family apparently like bought out like the whole first set from like stores and things like that. So it's definitely very shady. Like I said, it's a shit show completely. And although the Malley boys, specifically James, is actually found initially like criminally responsible for the death of Jennie, they take the court, I guess it's escalated to a higher court, and from there he is eventually found innocent. So obviously it's 1881. It's been many years since. This is 143 years ago, but nobody was actually ever held responsible for Jennie's death. So it is technically still considered a cold case. I also want to mention that James, after her death, actually works relentlessly to like find her killer. I'm not sure if that's like a cover up or something, but that is something that he does. So yeah, that is sort of the Jennie Cramer case, just to provide a little bit of like background and context to that. But when I saw this on the Huntsville Gazette, it definitely piqued my interest, and I think that true crime person in me was like, what is this? Like, I want to look into this. This is a very interesting case. And obviously I didn't provide all the details, but that right there is, you know, the Jennie Cramer case, which 143 years later is still unsolved. So on to our third story. I'm not going to provide as, you know, sort of like the full-blown context I did for the other one, because this is kind of like a more standalone story, I guess, but it does involve a pretty interesting robbery. So let's start. A bus containing a load of passengers from the Wabash Railroad while going from the depot to the village of Lexington, Missouri, about 8 o'clock on the evening of the 25th, was stopped by a party of 4 or 5 masked and armed men, and all the passengers robbed of their money and other valuables. The distance from the depot to Lexington is about 4 miles, through a comparatively open country. The men evidently were well acquainted with the ground and conducted the robbery in a manner that would indicate that they were experts in the business. I love that. Immediately after the deed, they left in the direction of the railroad. As soon as the passengers arrived at the town and acquainted the citizens with the facts, a number started in pursuit, determined if possible to capture the outlaws. So, yeah, I thought that this one really stood out to me. I kind of wonder how many passengers were on the train, but I'm assuming none of them were like, none of them were armed, because they say 4 or 5 men. I guess maybe like witness testimony varied, but it's definitely, I don't know, I just kind of wonder how like they handled the whole thing, but yeah, they kind of, I guess they just robbed they say a bus. I'm not sure if like that's just like one bus of a train. I'm not 100%, but basically they robbed everybody there of like their possessions and things like that. And when the people did get to their destination, they're like, yeah, this just happened. So it seems like a lot of like people, I'm assuming like vigilantes, started to see if they could pursue these people. Also in 1881, you would not want to be caught by vigilantes. This was like full blown like lynching, like street justice era. But yeah, I just thought that was like a pretty interesting story. I kind of wonder how, if they were ever caught. They didn't give any names though, so I don't know if I can even really look into it. But yeah, that's the third one. On to our fourth story. I'm gonna decide to follow up on the theme of robbery. So yeah, for our fourth story, I'll start this one. Okay, so a bold robbery was committed the other night in the southern edge of Stevenson near Carroll County, Illinois. 2 men at late hour called at the residence of a farmer named O'Brien, repenting that their wagon had broken down on the road. While O'Brien and one of the men were proceeding to the supposed wreck, the other slipped back to the house, gagged the farmer's wife, and robbed the premises of $3,000 in cash. Okay, so this is another one that kind of gagged me, I'm not gonna lie, and I don't say that ironically because the farmer's wife was gagged. It's just such an old, I feel like it's a tale as old as time, like pretending that something happened to you and then you go ahead and you like rob somebody. But they took $3,000 in cash. To put that into context, that's the equivalent of $92.5 thousand today. And I don't know how prominent like banks were in 1881, and also their farmers. I'm assuming this is a more rural area, so I guess that might be the case. But that is somebody stealing almost $100,000 of cash. Like, that's crazy. $3,000 today would have me worried. Like, I could not imagine losing $3,000 in 1881. That's really, really crazy. But yeah, that's a pretty interesting story. Nobody was really hurt, I guess, as opposed to their pockets. And I kind of wonder if like the farmer was done fixing the whole breakdown and then went home and like found his wife like tied up, like gagged, and he was just like, what the hell? Like, you know, like if they got away before he even like knew what had happened. But yeah, anyway, yeah, that's another robbery. They were really cutting up that week. Like, do better, guys. Okay, so this is like another, honestly, this one is the definition of unhinged. I'll just get this started. Okay, so at Forest City, Arkansas, Tate Wallace invited S.D. Apperson, city marshal, to take a cigar. And while standing at the counter of the saloon, Apperson drew his pistol and said, "I believe I'll shoot you." Tate, thinking he was jesting, replied, "Shoot away." Apperson fired, killing him instantly. No cause can be assigned for the murder, for the 2 men were apparently on the best of terms. Apperson was intoxicated at the time. That story is honestly like, that's like levels of Unhinged, where it's like weirdly like giving Florida Man. And I swear I read an article on the last installment and it was an Arkansas story. Like, I do not know what was going on in Arkansas in the 1880s, but this story is like actually wild. And like how they say Apperson was intoxicated at the time, like, no duh. You know, I genuinely wonder like what happened to SD Apperson, I guess, in like in true 1881 fashion. Of course, it's just like first initial, middle initial, last name. So I don't know who his name is enough for me to like Google it, but that story is really, really crazy. Guys, don't drink, and definitely don't like casually tell your drunk friend to like shoot away. But you know, I'm not gonna blame the victim, but listen, that's a lie. So continuing with the theme of Unhinged, of course, because that's the title. This one is from Leadville, Colorado. So at Leadville, Colorado, on the 27th, a lot of these occurred like the previous, week of August. So this would be August the 27th. Some assassin placed a large quantity of giant powder under the bay window of Judge J.L. Pendery's residence, another first initial, middle initial, last name, and fired it with a long fuse. The front part of the house was demolished, but fortunately no one was injured. No cause is assigned for the diabolical deed, and no clue has been obtained to the perpetrators. I will say they spell clue here with like C-L-E-W instead of like C-L-U-E. I wonder if that was like standard at the time. So part of me wonders if like the person who tried to blow them up, I guess he didn't like the judge for like sentencing somebody, or maybe he didn't like, I don't know. There's a lot of reasons why somebody would try to blow a judge's house up. That is definitely unhinged and crazy.
He's going to hell. In a handbasket.
But I'm just saying, like, he may have done something well within his right and very legal, but people are crazy as today as they were in 1881. Okay, so I keep looking at myself in the camera because like I feel like the light balance is like off for this video. But yeah, those were just some of the unhinged newspaper stories on the week of September 3rd of 1881 as reported by the Huntsville Gazette. I thought those were pretty interesting. Typically I just go into newspaper archives, honestly, just find any paper. I looked specifically for like African-American papers today, but honestly you can pull up any of them and just reading the front cover, it's the same level of unhinged that you'd see today. I thought those were just some of the interesting ones that I'll share with you guys today though. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and as always, enjoy your day.